my name is Benedict for Higher Hertz. As promised, this video is about Bedroom Producer Blog's Saturator. I was setting out to do this and then got distracted by their dirty filter, which I had quite a bit of fun with. This one, it's taken me a little bit to get my head around how it's good, but in the end, it actually really does do what it says it's going to do, so long as you don't overdo it. But before going much further, I'm going to ask for a little bit of your time for an aside. One of my big platforms as a mix engineer, as a record producer, is to help independent artists work in the way that they need to work, because there's so much pressure put on, even from YouTubers and what have you, that as an indie, your job is to be trying to clone whoever's on the top of Spotify lists, and that's really unwise. You know, you are in a David and Goliath type situation. Therefore, trying to attack Goliath head on with a pea shooter is just dumb. You can't win. So therefore, you have to go in a different direction. I just got my sticky fingers on the new Soft Cell album. Soft Cell obviously being most famous always for their 1980-81 cover of Bobby Bloom, I think, Tainted Love. Tainted Love's excellent song, tremendous cover. This time they came out swinging with a collaboration with Pet Shop Boys, so Purple Zone. And it's obviously the jewel in the crown here. But my point very much is that this is a band who are working on a reasonably limited budget. Rather than trying to assail Taylor Swift or Billie Eilish or whoever, there's actually an interview where there's mention of Dua Lipa, who actually managed to gazump the intended title of the record, hence the Happiness Not Included, which I think is a better title in reality for them, is that it's a record that really gains most of its strength when you sit and listen to it and absorb it for what it really is. It gains most of its strength from its limits. And as indies, we spend too much time trying to perfectify, to take away any possible negative. And as a result, we end up with nothing. In this situation, it's all about limits. Happiness Not Included is like life hasn't turned out the way that we thought it was going to. But rather than being a negative sort of a boo-hoo, Mark transitions, and Dave, they transition this kind of slightly gloomy approach to life into a charming, enjoyable thing, which helps the fan go, yeah, look, my life hasn't turned out the way I thought it was going to either. So there's a solidarity. We feel good. So whether you're into this kind of stuff or not, it's well worth a listen, no doubt it's on Spotify or whatever, to say what makes this record work. It's not to do with mixing. It's not to do with producer tricks. It's to do with the fact that if you engage with the material, then it's really nice work. And that's your job as an indie, and I'm always trying to train people to see things this way. It's not about perfectifying, it's about getting across your unique story. And in this case, Mark really gets across his unique story. We feel like we are engaging with Mark, our favourite dotty old aunt. And that makes it a really strong record. This is a path you want to be taking. Not about saying, have I got the perfectest VSTs or anything like that. Now, in terms of, yes, we are here to look at Bedroom Producer Blog's Saturator. So we'll start with a sense of, well, what happens with it or without it. Here's a track. Here is without. Now, what you may notice is that you feel the A-B difference more when we go to the without. This time I've actually rendered down, so we've got exactly the same, but all of these things are turned off. So rather than hearing it as to start with as a let's turn this and this and this and this and this and this and this off, which takes time, this is just a straight A/B comparison. And there is quite a difference. Every instance comes on. And as far as I can tell, and this is always an imprecise thing, our levels are about the same, even though you feel quite a push forward in level and energy, but there's also quite a push forward in the frequency sense as well. So while I started out with the individual case scenarios thinking, yeah, I don't know how grand this is, once we get to the end, and that's why I'm pushing this total AB more, the difference is tremendous. So the idea here being that we don't need to do any more fancy trickery other than essentially just dropping in the saturator with reasonable to mild settings on each of these things. Now, if you watched the saturation series I did recently, it's really the same process. And the result is a bigger, brighter, more engaging, more rich sounding track. So while at the individual level I wasn't bowled over, it wasn't as immediately exciting as some other saturators that I've used, ultimately, when everything has gone through it, remember the idea of a saturator being like if we plug our mythical instrument into a mythical Neve desk, that it adds a sort of a... This does that. Every single point of connection here has that saturation, that magic added, and the total result is a track that really builds and engages, and you hear that it widens in engagement, it deepens, everything about it is good. Bedroom Producer blog we looked at in the last one, so we won't push this at all. Saturator's slightly newer, it's a little better embedded in the site, a little easier to find. It is free, so we don't need to fuss too much about price. Yes, VST2, VST3 AU. I'm running the VST2, can't see any reason why the VST3 would be any different. Cool. It's free. It does do its job, but it does its job probably in the right way, in the sense that so long as you run it mildly, and that'll be the thing that we look at in this, then it accumulates through layers. So having a saturator on the drums, on the bass, and then on their bus, because that's essentially taking that sound out and plugging it into a second Neve channel, that's embiggened that, going into the masters, and of course on the reverb, where everything is compounding and embiggening. So there's nothing doing saturaty stuff in any particular way other than there's only one instance of Hertz delay, which is our reverb unit. There's a little bit there, but not much. So overall, by working together, not going, I'm going to have a massive thing happen here. Again, remember David versus Goliath. David has to sneak in under Goliath by little tiny mild movement here. Then here they compound, and they compound again here, as do sending this already saturated sound into the reverb with another layer of saturation. Just builds this magic. Might as well scoot through the good and bad. What's good is that, well, it works. As I said, I wasn't sure going in, but ultimately it really does work. So it adds depth and shine very nicely when used properly. What's interesting is that you have both a tube and a tape algorithm. and you can run both at once. So you can balance. You can say, okay, tube's doing more goodliness here than is tape, or tape's doing more goodliness, or a little from column A, a little from column B. Not entirely unique, but at this price point, pretty cool. So that's a nice thing, and it's 4K buttons, a little bit of fun. We'll have a look at that in a moment. In terms of negatives, it does go into drive pretty fast. So anything much above 20, 25, we are pushing far more into it being a distortion unit than a saturation unit. Personally, my preference on saturation units is that really sort of anything under 50 or 75% I would prefer to be not overtly distorting. But I think Bedroom Producer blog know that most people want distortion more than they want saturation. So if you're coming here looking for saturation, keep the knobs on the mild side. Try to remember the lyrics to the Motley Crue song on the wild side. Plus, there is no manual and no actual explanation as to what's their tube implementation, what's their tape implementation. I know it's free, and I know that given time we can work it out, but I'm all about demystifying things, and when a product has no manual, no sense of trying to explain in any way what these things are doing, how do these two combine? Does the tube push into the tape? Or does the tube go out its own path to the back door and the tape go out its path to the back door, in which case they don't affect each other? All these things, inquiring minds want to know, sir. And so I do see that as a definite weakness of the product. Right, to the features. We will start by turning off all of these, except for the one where we're going to start. We will start with the inevitable of drums. And if we pop this out, you're hearing some reverb, obviously. But it's this saturation sound that matters. So let's look into what it's got. Well, can't help but be amused by the 4K button. It doesn't give you the ability to resize, but it gives you this. I'm freaking man! It's amusing. This was done probably before it became fairly standard to have the resize, the infinite resizing here. So they've offered us a button, because if we were on 4K, it would probably be about this big. This little square in the corner. So they've solved that by giving us a Hugify button. Just amused me. Features. We have filters, a high pass and a low pass filter. So they seem relatively mild, which is fine, as they probably should be. They definitely don't seem to be resonant or anything, so they will just roll off tops and bottoms. Remember in the last video, and maybe I'll even pop it up here, the slide about this bit in the middle. This is where you mix. The bits outside, let them take care of themselves, because if you've mixed this properly, they will take care of themselves very nicely and therefore add to what you're doing. If you spend all your time mixing out here where you do not belong, then you're going to end up with a really messed up mix, because all of this will be wrong and it will exacerbate the problems you've got here. So if you're finding that you have too much happening in the bottom end, too much happening in the top end, that's where these roll off. Again, doesn't explain where they're pre or post. I think they're post these, but here's what it is. You go by ear. So filters done. Levels. We have the ability to push harder in or pull back out. These drives are inherently affected by levels. So pushing your inputs will appear to improve sound, because louder sounds always appear to be better to us. We're easily fooled that way until we train ourselves. Otherwise, it'll also just make these drive algorithms work harder. In other words, they will distort faster. So be careful. It's probably more likely you're going to need to pull back if you've started with a healthy signal in the first place. Reason works on a minus 12 dB. platform. Some others work on a minus 18 dB. And the reason those numbers are important, because that is where 0 RMS or VU is. So that's sort of where we perceive the 0 dB peak to really be. So if you're getting into gain staging, yeah, but this is more a case of using your ears to go, okay, I want a bit more or a bit less. Nothing in here is annotated, so there's no frequency numbers or anything. It's all by ear, which I actually think is in many ways a good thing. Knowing frequencies is nice, and it's nicer now that I'm far more skilled and I know what I'm doing. But in the early days, it is far better to work by ear than it is to work by eye. Otherwise, you will make decisions that you can tell yourself a perfect look because that's exactly the right number of hertz that I'm supposed to use, therefore I'm good. And meanwhile, you've totally muffed it because it's not right for the situation you have right now. Because there's so much emphasis. Actually, another aside, but very relevant here, is having a conversation with somebody in a group, a specialist group, about this kind of stuff, and he was saying, well, but you know, I feel like I don't mix right, and I'm not doing enough when I mix. And I said, well, the reality is most of this advanced mixing garbage that is in most YouTube tutorials is just not used, or it's used when it's there to solve a problem. Only when the problem raises its ugly head do we find a solution for it. We don't come in going, how can I hit this over the head with some fancy producer-y shiz? That's below amateur thinking. It's like level 0 thinking. We only roll out a problem when we have understood what the problem is. Then we find the solution for that problem in this situation, not by going, well, it's this. Again, that's level 0 thinking. You're not even at level 1 mixing if you're doing that. And it's not your job, unless you are a mix engineer. If you're mix engineering for Michael Jackson or something, then yeah, saying, Michael, I'm going to mix your record, look, I'm level 0 mix engineer, yeah, that may be a poor match from Michael's expectation, unless he's approached you. But if you're at a level 1 or a level 0 mix engineer situation, either hire somebody who's a level 1 or a level 2 or a level 3. I don't know what Michael Jackson's mix engineer would be, but good enough. The thing is, it's not your job, unless you're a mix engineer, to be saying, oh, what level am I? Get over it. So we're focusing back on finding solutions to the problems that present themselves and not inventing problems that we can then solve and go, look how producer-y I am. That's really wrong. Levels in, level out. Level out is the one that's more important for you to be using most of the time, simply because these processes will add level. It's inevitable. You're pushing stuff into, you've added level. You can see here, ins and outs don't match. Getting them to match perfectly is hard to impossible because we're actually changing the nature of the signal. Compression is added when we drive things because we're lopping tops off. Therefore, those ins and outs will read slightly different, but at least the important thing is that if we go A, B, that they should perceptually seem to be the same level. And then over time, this will add up, as you saw with the total AB. We've got then our tube. You'll hear that it's adding quite a lot of tops. And a crunchy kind of thing. By the time we get to crunchy, we really shouldn't be here, unless you're using this as a distortinator, in which case, fine, fair play, but it's not saturation anymore. But you can hear here, as we get into crunchy, you feel like there's a fatness that comes in. What you're looking for really is to get a little bit of that fatness Takes time to learn to hear it, and you absolutely won't hear it on your iDevice or stupid iBuds or whatever. But even in these K52s, K53s, a cheap AKG headphone, because I know what I'm listening for, I can feel as that comes in that the drum kit not only sort of embiggens in the belly, feels more solid, but it's got a bit more splash on the top end. Some of that's good, some of that's bad. So tube, don't do that. Unless you're specifically looking for, like, to sound like Public Enemy or something, you do not go into doing that. Then tape. This definitely thickens. I think that there is possibly some kind of compression happening in here. If it's a true tape algorithm, it should. It does have a slightly different feel. We have added quite a lot of level, so we need to pull that back. In my headphones, it feels just a little drivey, but adding speakers, it probably won't. So I'd say that's kind of cool. We've added some oomph and leap-heartedness and richness and depth to this. But with that depth, there's also a little bit of a tendency for the bass to become too much. Now, you might, again, still be trying to go, but the bass needs to be, like, you know, bigger than anything I've ever heard, and blah, blah, blah. It's like level zero thinking again, boys. This is not about this is about making a mix that works, that people can hear and understand. So if we've got too much welly, like subs in here, we lose control of our mix. So remember, the sub frequencies, the bit below where we really mix, if we're mixing right here, they will look after themselves beautifully. And largely by mixing right here, our emphasis is to get the clarity above the point where we're saying, well, everything below that subs, which means that if we roll off a little bit, that kick becomes clearer. Yes, there's less underneath it, but all that is mud. That's just going to mess up our mix. So if we roll off some of it, our kick itself, the punch of our kick becomes clearer, tighter drums. This does get a little bright. Again, easier to say, oh, but I want it to be super bright because the hi-hats are the... No, you're going to have a singer on top of this, or you're going to have a lead line on top of this, in which case that's the thing that needs to rise into the air. So let's roll some of this back. With the drums and the hats, you want splash, but splash doesn't live up at 20 kilohertz. You can go right back here and still have quite adequate splash. So that's narrowed our drums down so they're much tighter overall. They will sound better in the mix. That is all the features of this device. And that's plenty. The high and low pass filters and having two lots of drive, that's unusual enough in itself. But I think it's cool. Again, on the individual channel, if you're avoiding distortion, as I believe you should when you're saturating, yes, you may feel like, oh, I haven't necessarily added enough. But remember, that's not your job to add everything in one spot, because you then create an unmanageable sound. It's like if you are going to run a sumo wrestling contest, that you put your wrestlers into a room and then you feed them up so much so that they're so enormous, you then discover they can't actually get out the door to get to the ring to the match. That would be really dumb. Really, really dumb indeed. So you would work on embiggening your sumo wrestlers slowly, bit by bit, over time, before they go to their changing rooms, so they can put on their big whatever they're called. Otherwise, you've just created a fail right from the beginning. Layer by layer by layer, we will get there. So simple features. Let's now see what was done to the base. We've largely left it alone, but I've used the tape algorithm. That gets splatty. The reason I chose the tape algorithm is that it really brings out a little ping that's in here. You can hear beep, beep. That beep has quite a ping on it, and this helps bring that out. While the tube brings it out, it's far more same, whereas the tape brings it out and it's like, oh, that's a little bit different. So it's a nice funky sound from that. Cool. We've then got our rhythm bus. Compress the pair together. Hear how they really add a groove. So we're looking to deepen the groove with that, and then in this case I found that, let's pull it back, so 20 and 50. Again, it just gets kind of furry. But this, again, I believe has some kind of compression built in, which means that, and I've just recently done a T-compressor, which has 3 layers of compressors, so you can put the output of this compressor straight into the next compressor, into the next compressor. So that's serial compression, and I think that this is doing serial compression. As I said, where I serial compress, I'll often have something in between, and in this case, we've got this compressor and then this compressor. There isn't as such anything in between, but I see the stuff that's going into the bus and then hitting here as this compressor as being a little bit in between. But nonetheless, technically it's probably just straight serial compressor, one compressor going into another, which really embiggens the sound. Yes, it has made it louder, and then a little bit of tube. And here how it's adding a lot of levels appear to be roughly the same, so that's kind of cool. That's the real win, and part of the win in this is because, let's actually turn these off. Yeah, but it's a little polite in what it adds. But when we add these in, so remember, we're building little layers, so we've got a little on the drum, a little on the bass, a little on the bass, but they become larger than the sum of the parts. This is where the magic comes from. This is where the whole thing started. Some of my special electric piano playing. Little from column tube, little from column tape. This sound very easily goes into Splatsville, particularly with tube. And that's just nasty. We don't want that. Tape is far more resilient when it comes to drive on things. But the electric piano wanted to go into drive. Some sounds, particularly synth sounds, will really want to go into drive. That's just what they're going to do. So be aware that you're not just going, well, I need to. And it's like you've got to work with the sound you've got. In this case, allowing to push into tape worked out far better. It was just that sense of presence in the mix. Oh, there's a little bit of the old Hertz delay in there, providing some chorus. String sound. Yeah, how it's sort of, it's nice. It's like, oh, it's the right sound, but it's sort of flat. Add this in, and suddenly we're getting that beautiful feeling of, well, not quite a Gary Newman string, but we're getting into that sort of direction. So Thor has lovely filters, a little bit of chorus and delay. I've pulled, actually no, I haven't pulled this drive back, so there'll be a tiny bit of drive with regards to the filter, but not a lot. It's really the drive that we're getting here, and then as that flows out into the reverb and the masters. So that really comes alive. We're getting nice little brightness in the harmonics, but one of the things that I like about this ultimately is that somewhat like the Reason devices, although nowhere near as dramatically, is that it's building something in the mids as well as just top and bottom, and that's nice. You know, things that only do top and bottom, everything's got this horrible smiley face is well, not smiley face is horrible, but it becomes problematic when every single sound in your mix is smiley faced. So the overall sense of in the mids is really good. Next, we will be looking at our reverb. So actually we might just put our reverb into solo, just so you can hear it. I do this when I'm building a reverb sound. It's not a nice reverb, but once we put a little bit of sparkle in and a little bit of boost, I just can't remember what the numbers were before. I don't mind if this is growing a little bit of level. Just hear that little bit of like, ooh, you know, we've the reverb is carrying the whole track to feel a little bit bigger, and that's its whole job there. And then of course to the masters. In my headphones I'm hearing that as just a little much. That may be because I've pushed these too hard or something. No, obviously that was... So it's taking all those little bits of sparkle and excitement that we've added at every layer here, including with the reverb, and giving them a little bit more of a goose. That's why we want to be mild over there. And then at this point, everything gets embedded again. See, our outputs are about the same, but the resulting sound that we feel is so much better. And while individually, as I say, initially I wasn't sort of like, oh, this is the most exciting. It was sort of like, am I going in the right direction? I've promised I better go with it. So I thought, well, let's use the formula that I've used before. And then once I get to that total mix A/B, it's like it's really doing its job. Yes, you can push it into distortion, but I don't encourage that. I really don't. If you're after a distortion unit, this will do a certain amount of cool things, but we're talking saturation because it's called a saturator, so keep those numbers really mild. And then once you've got your total A/B, you're going to go, wow, my mix is so much richer as a result of that. So bottom line, it does a really wonderful job for its price, provided you don't overdo it. But that's going to be the same for any saturator. Don't overdo it. But because the throw of our knobs, dog next door's upset, can get a little excitable much past about 15-20%, it's very easy to be sort of doing this kind of stuff and turning out with truly terrible results, and then going, oh well, the thing's no good. And it's like, well, no, you're not learnt to listen yet. Learn to listen, learn to hear, and then you'll find, wow, we get great results. Because the last thing anybody wants to do as a fan, because remember, you should be doing this for fans, not for your own ego. Yes, your own ego will get some fun out of this, but really only when fans say to you, wow, you touched my life. Jake, whose record I helped put together and get out, so you happen to have it with me, he's been quite humbled, got to put his thing back inside, where people he knows have come to him and sat down and told him their reactions, quite personal reactions that they've had to particular songs. Wow, you really touched me on that song because it made me think of in their lives. And that means that he's actually building fans. He's building connections with these people. That's your job. And going lightly on your saturator at each point so that when the track comes out, sounds great, then that's giving your fans the greatest chance to really hear and engage with what you're doing. Just as I engaged with what Bitter Betty Almond is doing here in his songs, despite any of his limits from being old, and his voice is not what it used to be when he was 20 or 30. Fair enough, we're all getting older. But rather than fighting those things and trying to make them disappear and auto-tuning it and making it sound weird, he's still doing what he's a master at doing, which is showing us those feelings that we can relate to. And that's what makes the art worthwhile. That's what will make people like me take the record into their lives and go, this makes it better. That's your job there. So Bedroom Producer Blog, final words here, Bedroom Producer Blog Saturator turns out to be really a pretty cool device. It's easier to get into Splatsville with it. That's why it didn't make it to the saturation overview. But once I'd spent enough time with it to build a whole mix, then I can see how it does really a rather cool job. So if you're starting out and starting to say, well, I want to understand what the saturation business is, if you haven't got a full understanding from this video, and that's not the point of this video, then shuttle back through the Higher Hertz videos here on your YouTube. It's not too hard. You just press Higher Hertz, their name, and then it'll show you a list of all their videos. Shuttle back, you'll find 3 videos in a row on saturators. The first one is where I'd really encourage you to start, which is Soft Tube Saturation Knob, because there's a lot in there about what saturation is, how it works. And then there's Voxengo tube amp. Oh, IVGI's in the middle there, and Analog Stage from Hornet. So it's actually 4 videos that really go over and over. There's the same format as here. This will do a great job when you use it right. So if you're starting out, BandLab or something like that, you can run this, I'm pretty sure. Maybe not on your iDevice, but you need to get off your iDevice. You can't work on an iDevice. I don't care what people say, you can't do serious work, you can't see what's going on. You've probably got a laptop. if it'll run on a Chromebook, even that's got to be better than an iDevice. But get to the situation where you can bring in better quality devices like this, and then a little bit here. If you're not sure, just pop it in and put, say, 10% on your tube, 10% on your tape. Just balance your levels as much as you can so that they feel like they're effectively the same level. And when you A-B, that way you're not being fooled. But even if you don't do that, even if you just go 10 here, close it, 10 here, 10 here, 10 here, 10 here, on every single one of these, get to the end, 10 here, you're going to find that your mixers suddenly get this extra... There's no magic to this. None at all. It's just a case of doing the job. So a device that I wasn't bowled over coming in, but it's always in the ultimate, the collective outcome, then I'm sold on it. It does its job really, really well, and so therefore I'm actually delighted to recommend it to people, as I say, BandLab or something like starting out in the simpler things, because it gives you the high and low pass filters, as well as a couple of ways to add a little bit of character. And if you just use it even with that formula, it's going to improve your results. If you overdo it, you try to get clever, but that's your fault, not the device's fault. Hopefully you have found value in this. I know that I actually found value. I had to change my mind, and that's a good thing, because I came up with a different conclusion in the end from where I started. That's a great thing. If you have questions, hit the subscribe button and ask them down below. If you just want to give some nice feedback, tell us how we're helping make your day better, helping you improve your craft, pop it on down below, because we don't get direct payment from doing all of this. So your engagement, more than just numbers of plays, that adds a real value. I know I love it when I get up in the morning and I look through recent videos and I go, oh, there's some nice personal feedback that makes me go, I'm doing the right thing. I'm helping people. Even if it's only one person, it's still helping people. So the most important thing is have fun, have a great day.